Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just dive right in, because today we're looking at one of the absolute most powerful stories in human history. It's a story about overcoming obstacles that seem completely, totally insurmountable. We are going to examine the legacy of Nelson Mandela, affectionately known to the world as Madiba. And listen, this isn't just your standard history lesson. It's a look at the sheer greatness of a journey, from a prisoner to a president, and how one individual's choices can literally reshape the entire world. Most people see a wall and see a dead end. Nelson Mandela saw a wall and saw a challenge to climb. That really sets the tone for everything we're about to discuss. Mandela was so much more than just a man. He became this massive global symbol of hope for a nation in chains. He taught the world a deeply counterintuitive lesson, that the most powerful weapon to change the world actually isn't a gun, it's forgiveness.
Section 1. The Birth of a Rebel. Let's take a look at his early life.
Born in 1918 in the tiny village of Mavezo, Rolihlahla Mandela was, from the very start, destined for leadership. But the environment he was born into was fundamentally broken. He was up against apartheid. For those who might not know, apartheid was a cruel, systematic engine of racial segregation. This was the South Africa he grew up in, a society deeply and violently divided along racial lines. And Mandela, well, he didn't just witness this injustice from the sidelines. He decided to actively fight it.
As a young lawyer in Johannesburg, he joined the African National Congress, or the ANC. Now, initially, their whole approach was rooted in peaceful protests. But as the oppression deepened, Mandela's strategy actually evolved. He made this monumental shift from peaceful protests to armed resistance. Now, you might be wondering, why would a man who later became a literal global icon of peace make that kind of choice? The rationale for this shift is captured perfectly in his own powerful words. The hard facts were that 50 years of nonviolence had brought the African people nothing but more repressive legislation. He looked at the data, he looked at the history of his people, and realized that peaceful methods just weren't working against such a brutal regime anymore. It was a calculated, incredibly difficult decision born entirely out of necessity.
Section 2. The Sacrifice. 27 years.
Because rebellious actions against an oppressive state always have consequences, right? So, a heavy silence fell in 1962 when Mandela was arrested. And this brings us to the famous Rivonia trial. Standing on the docks, facing the very real possibility of execution, he didn't back down. No way. He famously declared that he was prepared to die for the ideal of a democratic and free society. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison.
27. I literally just want us to pause for a second and let the sheer weight of that number sink in. 27 years. For almost 3 decades, his home was a cold, damp, tiny prison cell on Robben Island. Just think about what it takes to survive that, mentally and emotionally, day in and day out.
He was a prisoner in body, for sure, but his spirit, it absolutely remained the commander-in-chief of the revolution. While the outside world was screaming, "Free Nelson Mandela," he was inside being incredibly strategic. He even learned Afrikaans, the actual language of his oppressors. He did this deliberately so that he could one day negotiate with them. He was preparing for the future, even from a damp cell.
Section 3. The Resurrection and Leadership. The Dawn of a New Era.
The story doesn't end in that cell. Eventually, the gates finally open. On February 11th, 1990, Mandela walks out of prison. Then, just 4 years later, the impossible happens. In 1994, South Africa holds its first multiracial election in history, and the prisoner becomes the president. It is literally one of the most rapid and astonishing transitions of power the modern world has ever seen. When he walked out of that prison, and when he took office, he had a choice. He could have possessed a heart completely full of revenge, using his newfound power to punish those who stole 27 years of his life. Right? Most people would, but instead, he extended a hand in peace, using his power to heal. It's an astonishing choice that completely shocked the world.
Let's look at a really specific example of how he put this into practice. To unite what he called a rainbow nation, he did something unthinkable to many of his own supporters. He wore the jersey of the Springboks. Now, this was the national rugby team, a symbol that was previously hated by black South Africans as a representation of apartheid rule. By putting on that jersey, he proved that courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. He led by example to forge unity out of thin air.
Section 4. The Eternal Flame. A Lasting Legacy.
Nelson Mandela passed away in 2013, but a legacy like that, it doesn't just disappear. He never truly left us. His life serves as a literal blueprint for anyone fighting for justice today. It is tangible proof that no matter how dark the night gets, the dawn of freedom is inevitable. But only if you keep walking. You have to keep moving forward.
I mean, think about it. Defeating apartheid seemed impossible. Surviving 27 years in prison seemed impossible. Becoming president after all of that seemed utterly impossible. But as Mandela himself famously said, it always seems impossible until it's done. It completely changes our perception of what human beings can actually accomplish.
Which leaves us with one final question. As you go about your day, taking in the massive scope of Mandela's life, I want you to ask yourself, what impossible mountain will you climb today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I really hope this inspires you to take on whatever challenges are standing in your way.